Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Business Records Made in Iowa manufacturing event. Today, we're going to be diving into the state's largest industry, manufacturing, to explore how it's adapting to changing conditions, innovating through challenges, and discussing what the road looks like ahead economically. I'm Chris Konetsky. I'm president and group publisher at Business Publications Corporation, which publishes the Business Record. We're proud to bring you this important conversation. At the Business Record, it's our mission to help businesses do business better. And our audience, you're all the reason that we do what we do. And we've got a great program lined up for you today to provide a little bit of insight into what might be ahead in the manufacturing industry, which we know, of course, has large implications across the state's economy. But before we dive in, we'd like to take a moment to thank and introduce the sponsors who are helping make today's event possible. First, we want to give a special thank you to our supporting sponsor, McKee, Voorhees, and Cease. MVS has been a leading firm specializing in intellectual property law since 1924. Their team of advanced manufacturing attorneys is not only equipped with degrees related to the fields of work that they practice, but more importantly, real-world manufacturing experience. A big thank you to Luke Morehauser, patent attorney and managing partner, for joining us today. He's going to tell us a little bit more about MVS. Luke, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, and welcome everyone to the Business Records Manufacturing Forecast event. As mentioned, I'm Luke Morehauser, managing partner at McKee, Voorhees, and Cease. We are an intellectual property boutique law firm here, headquartered in Des Moines. Proud to sponsor today's event and to continue supporting Iowa's thriving manufacturing community. Manufacturing remains one of Iowa's greatest strengths. It drives economic growth, sparks innovation, and creates opportunities that reach far beyond our state. At MBS, we have the privilege of working alongside manufacturers of all sizes, helping them protect the technologies, processes, and creative ideas that set them apart in an increasingly competitive global marketplace. For more than a century, our firm has guided clients through the complex world of patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, and everything in between. Many of our attorneys bring backgrounds in engineering, chemistry, and other technical fields, allowing us to understand not only the mechanics behind innovations, but also the critical importance of safeguarding the value. The road ahead is both exciting and complex. Emerging technologies, especially advances in AI, along with shifting costs, funding challenges, and global competition will continue to shape the future. But we are sure that Iowa manufacturers have shown time and again that they are indeed Iowa strong, resilient, resourceful, and ready to lead. Thank you for being part of this event. Again, we're just privileged to be a sponsor and look forward to the conversations today.
Thanks, Luke. We appreciate it. And thanks for the sponsorship and helping make a program like this happen. We are also supported by the Iowa Economic Development Authority, who is helping support today's event. IEDA has been a driving force behind strengthening Iowa's manufacturing sector, from supporting innovation and automation to helping businesses grow, train talent, and compete globally. Their support is also helping make today's conversation possible, so a big thank you to them. All right, now we're going to shift into today's main event, our expert panel. And leading the conversation is Gigi Wood, senior staff writer at the Business Record, along with contributions from our editor, Sarah Dean. They're going to be guiding the discussion to tackle the effects of tariffs, the economic uncertainty on Iowa manufacturing, and what that's going to mean for our economy here in the state. You're in great hands with both of them. Both are super knowledgeable on the topic and are going to be helping lead today's panel. They've got a great group of panelists lined up for you, and I'll let Gigi and Sarah tell you a little bit more.
Great, thanks, Chris. We're excited to kick off today's panel. Manufacturing, as you've heard, is vital to the state's economy. It's the largest contributor to Iowa's GDP at 17%, or $35 billion annually. And 2025 has been marked by tariff volatility, economic uncertainty, all while Iowa's manufacturing sector is taking on new and existing challenges, including higher interest rates, a lagging ag economy, supply chain disruptions, and ongoing labor issues, including immigration and deportation. A handful of manufacturers have reported sizable layoffs. The Iowa Association of Business and Industry recently reported their third quarter survey results, showing steady but subdued expectations. We'll be hearing more about that. New tariffs are being put into place this month. Some started August 1. Others start tomorrow, August 7th. So we have a lot to talk about. Let's introduce our panelists. We can turn on the national news and read economic reports online, but there are a few places we can go to learn specifically about the manufacturing economy in Iowa from experts in the field, and that's who we have with us today. We'd like to welcome Nicole Crain, president of the Iowa Association of Business and Industry. ABI first began as the state's Manufacturers Association, and Nicole has been with ABI for more than 13 years now as its leader. Ernie Goss, director of the Institute for Economic Inquiry and the Jack A. McAllister Chair in Regional Economics at Creighton University. Ernie has produced the Mid-America Business Conditions Index and Rural Main Street Index reports monthly for many years. Matt Cook is Chief Marketing Officer at Sukup Manufacturing, an Iowa manufacturing success story. They use advanced manufacturing practices to produce products for grain storage, drying, and handling. Peter O'Razum, interim chair at the Iowa State University Department of Economics, has spent his 40-year career focused on labor markets, regional development, and has published 104 refereed journal articles and 17 book chapters. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Let's start with our first question. When it comes to the manufacturing industry in Iowa, what are you seeing and hearing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, whether it's through association members, economic indicators, or your own business? Let's start with Nicole.
Great. Thank you, Gigi, and thank you to the Business Record for the opportunity to speak today and join this esteemed panel. Again, as Gigi mentioned, my name is Nicole Crain with Association of Business and Industry. Quick background, as Gigi also referenced, we started as the Iowa Manufacturers Association. We now represent all industries, but what's unique about ABI is that we have members in all 99 counties and all sizes. And although we represent many industries, the majority are still in manufacturing. And our team has been spending a lot of time on the road. We take pride in going out and meeting with our members and really hearing from them on the ground. And as you saw in the Business Record before this panel, uncertainty, I think, is the word of the day. That's what we continue to see in our surveys. But when you dig deeper, what I'm still seeing and hearing as I'm talking with members is workforce. And how do we upskill our current workforce? How do we recruit new talent to the workforce and to the manufacturing industry? And how do we talk to them about the great jobs and careers there are in manufacturing, even through the uncertainty that we are seeing? Employers still need employees, whether that's in rural or urban, large or small manufacturers. So I know we'll talk more about that today, Gigi, but I just wanted to touch base on, with all the uncertainty, there's still lots of bright things going on, and our members are more committed than ever to Iowa and to the manufacturing economy.
That's great. Thanks, Nicole. Ernie, let's go with you next.
Okay, well, thank you, Gigi, and thanks to the Business Record and fellow panelists, and of course the sponsors of this event. Great to be with you. Apologize for my sort of casual attire. I'm at the beach near Pensacola, Florida, and so I went out looking for a collared shirt this morning. No luck, no collared shirts. But anyway, thank you, Gigi, for the question there. And we do a monthly survey of manufacturers, supply managers in manufacturing across 9 states, including Iowa, and the results have just not been good. They've been primarily moving sideways, and it has a lot to do with agriculture. And of course, in Iowa, it's the forward linkages to, for example, to China, where we're seeing some issues in terms of tariffs and a slowdown in China in terms of purchasing manufactured goods and agricultural goods from the U.S. and from Iowa as well. And then if you look at of course, the supply side, not so good there. Well, good in the sense of lots of supply of agricultural products. And of course, this has just meant commodity prices just not where we'd like to see them. We're talking about grain prices well below growth neutral for most farmers in the region and in Iowa. And of course, then we've got livestock node prices there are much better, but that's because of a limited supply. And those farmers that don't have cattle, of course, that's an issue. But nonetheless, as was brought out earlier by Nicole, we're talking about tariffs producing real uncertainty out there. And of course, most economists, we believe in comparative advantage, free markets, the freer markets, and we're not seeing that. And the idea that what are the tariffs? I can't keep it straight. I mean, I try to watch the news. I can't, and it's just, what are the tariffs? Where are they going? I know now India is getting hit, and of course China. And the real key, the unknown is what happens in China. Of course, that's very important for the Iowa economy in terms of not just manufactured goods, but agricultural goods as well. And what we've seen thus far is you compare 2025 to 2024, exports are down fairly significantly in Iowa, and for that matter, the region, the 9-state region that we survey here at Creighton University. And by the way, I go by Ernie. I know I'm listed there, Dr. Ernie Goss. I only ask my wife and kids to call me Dr. Goss. Everybody else is Ernie. So, and thanks again for having us. And I'd like to really delve into these issues. Very, very important issue as I see it as an economist, see it going forward. And so again, thank you for having me on today.
Thanks, Ernie. Matt, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Ernie, I also like the shirt. I am also a little bit more casual today. We have got a large group in actually of our customers, but like the other panelists said, happy to be here today. Thank you to the sponsors and the Business Record for having us. My name is Matt Cook, Chief Marketing Officer at Sukkot Manufacturing. I'm responsible for all global sales and advertising. The international team has definitely been constantly changing the way they feel multiple times a day with what's happened in policy decisions and constantly changing trade situations. Commodity prices, as Ernie mentioned, continue to kind of remain in the toilet, and with the large crop that we have coming, it's great in the fact that we're getting more volume, but it is still keeping farm income definitely in the lower side that we've seen for the last decade. You couple that with inflation and input cost rises and high interest rates, all of that is a formula for no major capital expansions and improvements within the farm side. They'd rather just kind of get to next year where there's a better financial situation. We keep 850 people busy every single day, 650 in the state of Iowa. We've got 6 distribution centers throughout the Midwest, 2 different international presence, manufacturing actually in Ukraine, as well as a foothold in Western Europe and Denmark. But we sell export product into 100 unique countries, so including all 50 states. So we're blessed to be able to have a wide net that we cast, but broad strokes, our largest input cost here at Sukkot is steel, which is indirectly affected by the tariffs, despite the fact that we buy 100% U.S. steel. Those costs continue to go up. As my team looks at that, as we're in control of global pricing, we see the more or less a 12 to 15% rise in raw material input costs. So that's a significant impact on what next year looks like.
Thanks, Matt. We'll get back into that in a second. Peter, your thoughts?
Well, manufacturing is a critical part of the Iowa economy. I think as a share of employment, it has the 4th highest share among the U.S. states and the 8th highest share in terms of gross state product. And Iowa itself has been performing relatively poorly coming out of the pandemic. If you look at employment overall, it's relatively flat since 2019. In manufacturing, we've given away about 4.6% of our jobs, and particularly in durable goods manufacturing, but more recently, our non-durable goods, our food processing, has also given away jobs. And I think a lot of that is related to weakness in international markets for what we're producing, which then has an impact on our manufacturing firms that are trying to sell particularly agricultural machinery to farmers, not just in the U.S., but internationally. And so I do think that there's some serious concerns looking forward. But oddly enough, to Nicole's point, Iowa is also being held back by the fact that we've lost a lot of our labor supply over that period of time. The pandemic cut off immigration, which was 38% of our population growth since 2000. And so the firms that want to hire are having trouble finding people, even as other firms are trying to cut back on their current use of labor.
Thanks, Peter. Those fascinating numbers. When it comes to manufacturing and the economy, like we said earlier, this has been mentioned already several times, the buzzword for 2025 seems to be uncertainty. Let's talk about tariffs more. Can you speak a little bit more in detail about how tariffs have affected your business or the businesses that you work with or watch? And how do you think tariffs will play out in the short term and long term for manufacturing in Iowa? Let's start again with Peter.
Well, it's interesting when you look at tariffs, they're being used for what is the old saying, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So tariffs are being used in Canada because we don't like their policies toward the Palestinian statehood, and we're imposing tariffs in Brazil because we don't want them persecuting or prosecuting Bolsonaro. And in India, we don't like them buying Russian oil. And if you think of those things, if there's a purpose to tariffs, you want to have them narrowly tailored to the purpose of business and not for political ends. And using them for political ends actually just adds more uncertainty. Who knows what will be the rationale for a change in tariff policy tomorrow, and whether or not we're actually going to impose those things. If you look at the impacts on agriculture, part of it is that you get retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural producers, and Iowa depends critically on other people buying our products. If we were just selling to Iowans, we would have a much smaller economy here in the state. But it also has an impact on futures prices. And so if there's uncertainty as to whether or not there's going to be an international market for our products at harvest, that then depresses futures prices. And so currently agricultural prices for both corn and soybeans are about 30% below where they were in 2021. So that has a huge effect on the Iowa economy.
Thanks, Peter. That's a lot to think about there. Ernie, what are your thoughts?
Well, Gigi, in our last survey, we asked about the manufacturers about tariffs, and high share said no in this, no to tariffs, and saying it was negatively affecting their business. And not only that, pushing up prices. The idea somehow is that this will not be, it'll be a one-time jump in prices. Not the case in my judgment. Since we're seeing staggered tariffs, we'll see staggered increases in prices, and I think that'll be fairly consistent. And the president has pushed for lower interest rates. Well, I'm on the side of the Federal Reserve here. There's no room right now to move lower on interest rates in terms of inflation, but in terms of what's going on in manufacturing, look at the losses in jobs in our region. We've lost about almost 1% of manufacturing jobs in the last year. You look to the U.S., almost 1 percentage point loss in manufacturing jobs. We continue to lose jobs in manufacturing, and some of that's due to the unavailability of workers. Now, we've had, as you probably know, we had ICE raids in food processing here in Omaha, and that's really done it's really pushed down the job picture, and that's U.S. and particularly, as Peter said, in Iowa and in Nebraska, we depend heavily on immigration, and I would say legal immigration. But even if you're legally here, there's some real concerns, and some of those individuals have moved underground. In other words, not going to work, and some of them have moved back to either Mexico or their home country, and that's hurt production, and I think it'll continue to hurt production. Again, I think most economists are on the side of more open economy. Again, comparative advantage since Ricardo of 1819, we talked about the law of comparative advantage. It's not, we don't call it a good idea, we call it a law. In other words, produce what you have a comparative advantage in. And Iowa has a particular comparative advantage in all those things along the food chain, all the way from selling soybean in China to manufacturing in John Deere to the steel manufacturers that provide steel and aluminum to John Deere. So we're seeing that this is spilling over, and I'm not very keen on these tariffs, and I'm concerned about what they're doing in terms of potentially a stagflation.
That's interesting. Nicole, what are you seeing or hearing from your association members?
Yeah, and just to kind of add on to what Ernie was saying, Iowa and Nebraska. So as part of our organization, we're also part of a national organization, right? The National Association of Manufacturers, who have done a lot on the trade and tariffs. But my peers around the Midwest, we all got together and we said, why don't we do a Midwest trade study? So that's something we recently did this spring. But as we talk, what we've seen in Iowa, we have a trade surplus. Also, our members, especially as it looks to Canada and Mexico, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone probably on this panel, and especially in the audience, but Canada is by far our largest trading partner. When we talk to our members, they're concerned about what that means, because especially Canada and Mexico, a lot of our smaller manufacturers supply to in the motor vehicle space. So we heard from one manufacturer that a car cushion, for example, crosses the border 7 times before it's complete. And so that's a lot of moving parts. And granted, I think that also speaks to why we need to have the USMCA renegotiated, make sure that we're getting the fair trade. We have asked our members in both our quarterly survey. We also conducted a CEO survey of all of our members in all industries that we're going to be releasing soon. But when we've asked them about tariffs and if they support them, one thing that I think many of our members have experienced, not all, but several have experienced unfair trade practices. So back to Peter's comments is as if we're going to do this, and I think our members by and large appreciate what the Trump administration is trying to do. Let's get more manufacturing in Iowa. Let's get more manufacturing in America, but let's do that in a targeted approach. So we hear that from our members. We hear that 40% don't support the trade policy on Canada and Mexico. 43% support the tariff and trade policy on China. So I also think it probably speaks to the different industries that we have within our membership and how they are directly affected and what they're seeing and hearing in the work that they do. But that's kind of, I think as we're looking at have the tariffs impacted the business. Again, we will be releasing this, so we'll make sure we have it out, but we're actually releasing it to our membership tomorrow. So this is fresh news. We've had a little bit out, but not the full study, but almost 40% have seen that tariffs on Chinese imports have negatively impacted their business. And then on Canadian and Mexican imports, again, right on 40%. And that was early on. This was done in June. So this is before this next round. So kind of, I guess, Gigi diving a little bit more into the weeds on Ernie and Peter's comments, but what we've heard directly from our members when we've surveyed these companies is that they are feeling it. They also understand. And so being cautious, right, in all their investments. But I think, as it comes to what Iowa, trade is very important to us, and we want to make sure that we continue to support those open markets. So appreciate the question.
Thanks, Nicole. I can't wait to see the results of that. Matt, what are you seeing?
While we keep a pretty good pulse on our industry and kind of our partners and do a lot of benchmarking, I'm not going to speak for them today, but I can tell you just from a direct impact that we've had, Nicole pretty well hit it on the head with USMCA has to mean something. We can't just kind of change the game when I think that we were all depending on each other. We have such an interdependent economy that it is impossible. The moment we start kind of changing the game, then all of a sudden supply chain is massively disrupted. We have significant changes from we have a fantastic Canadian partner that sells us a lot of hardware, that there's games being played on how that works with different bin manufacturers. I can't remember who had talked about the unfair trade practices. That's what we're seeing. We can't just change HS export codes on a whim. Somebody's going to get knocked at some point, and it's going to be shame on you for a while. But please continue to do so until further discussion happens. So I would like to see some more permanency, regardless of what it is, to it, so that we can make some intelligent long-term business decisions on not only on supply chain but also on customer base. Where in Canada we're down 40% in our year-over-year bookings with them, and down 30% in Mexico, and they're incredibly important trade partners for us. The benefit that we are seeing, though, is we are very competitive in the United States, and our domestic market still is the large gorilla for us, and a lot of renewed interest despite the suppressed commodity prices. There's been a late push now and says we're not selling now. We need to store it. We need to invest in that. I don't like it, but we're doing it. And so we've benefited that over the last 45 days here, but continue to see situations that we don't like, and then there seems to be no answers. And at the same time, we with some of the different, whether it's the big beautiful bill that has gone through, that does have a farm bill component to it, they continue to push the buck on USDA funding for REAP and EQIP, which is a kind of a cornerstone funding program for the way that dryers and material handling equipment has been sold in the past. And that is because of that uncertainty, a lot of those orders have dried up as well.
Thanks. And Matt, can you go into a little bit more detail about what else you're seeing, raw material prices, what you're hearing from farmers and your business partners in other sectors, including ag and finance?
Yeah. So I kind of alluded to it before. Labor and overhead is at an all-time high. Though I will say we aren't struggling with it as much as I guess I expected to. Now we're more of an isolated area, rural Iowa, where we are in Sheffield. We have a pretty fixed area, but we've onboarded 4 new production facilities in the last 5 years, and that has everything to do with we cannot just rely on this area for labor. We have to go to where the labor is, which is I saw a question in the chat about that a minute ago. So the folks that can do it, Brian, I think is who sent that. We are investing in other communities for, like I said, in the last 5 years. But as it comes to those pieces of it, all of our input costs for our customers are all, again, at an all-time high. Commodity prices on the low end. Interest rates, we'd love to be able to see back down 1.5 points. I think all of us would. I don't know how that sits with Ernie, but I'm pretty keen on having 4 to 5% interest rates again, especially for our standard lines of credit. But again, our largest input cost is steel, and we're definitely seeing a significant increase on that. And the only reason it's not higher is because the automotive sector is struggling.
Thanks, Matt. Ernie, any thoughts on what Matt just said about interest rates?
Oh, I agree with Matt on that. I would have, I think they did the right thing in July, but I think there will be a cut in interest rates on the 16th and 17th. The 17th of September, we will see an interest rate cut then, but it'll only be 0.25%. There's just too much inflationary pressure, and tariffs are part of it. And I agree with the president in his trade negotiations. If he's trying to get the other side to come down with their tariffs, my concern is that if we see tariffs as a win-lose. I see tariffs as a win-win. In other words, we reduce our tariffs, they reduce theirs. Well, I'm not certain that's how everyone sees it right now, particularly Xi Jinping. And I haven't heard anything out of Sheinbaum, President Sheinbaum in Mexico. She's been silent, at least to my ears anyway, whereas we heard a lot coming out of Canada. But again, we're going to see lower interest rates, but the Fed is caught between a rock and a hard place. Inflationary pressures from tariffs, and it is there. It's been thus far, it's squeezed the profits of particularly small businesses, squeeze their profits. Ultimately, they're going to pass this on to their consumers, and we're going to see that in higher inflationary pressures. But again, the U.S. economy is slowing down, particularly manufacturing. Right now, manufacturing is definitely slowing down. We had a lot of front running of purchases from abroad in the first quarter, getting ahead of the tariffs. And even now we're seeing some of that, some front running. Ultimately, we're going to have to pay a price for that. And that's where I'm really concerned about what's going to happen to manufacturing, because of the inventories were built up. Now inventories are coming down. I'll wait and see what happens in terms of replacing those inventories. But I agree with Matt. Definitely like to see lower interest rates. Now, can they go back to their former level? No chance of that. No chance we'll see interest rates of those levels. I think we may see a cut of 1 percentage point over the next 6 months. That would be my bet or my guess at this point in time, be a 1 percentage point a cut. And I think we do need that. Yes.
That's great. And that really leads into the next question for you, Ernie. I read one of your reports in the last couple of months, and it said that, just paraphrasing here, that a lot of the Midwest bank CEOs are, it seemed like they were in favor of tariffs. And I was hoping that you could talk about that a little bit, what they're seeing and what their perspective is.
And as you're saying, that is correct. In other words, 40%, about 4 out of 10 say tariffs are hurting, but the other 60% support the tariffs and support the negotiations. Now, it's hard to argue that the tariffs on Brazil, because of Bolsonaro, that's, I think, as Peter said earlier, everything, every trades is the hammer to every problem. And I've got concerns with that nonetheless. But yes, I think there is broad support for the president's trade negotiations and the tariffs. At this point in time, this part of the country, this part being the midsection, the Mid-America region, right, 9 states, right down the middle of the country that we serve at Creighton University, there's broad support for the tariffs. But I'm concerned that the tariffs are ultimately going to show up in higher inflation, and that's going to keep the Fed on in terms of higher interest rates. In other words, again, I'll see 1 percentage point over the next 12 months. But there's going to be a limit to that. There's too much inflationary pressures, in my judgment.
That's so interesting. So what do you think needs to happen, in this kind of current time frame to fix that and ease those pressures?
I think we need to see some of our trading partners bring down their tariffs, particularly China. We need to see some movement there. We need to see India move, not retaliate. Retaliation is going to be not good for us in terms of India. And Canada, that one is there's so much back and forth, as Nicole talked about earlier, going back and forth across the border. Products go back and forth, components, I should say. We need to see that open, and not we're seeing, for example, Canadians that used to be here where I am right now, Florida, they're not coming down here. I mean, that it's showing up in tourism. And this is very concerning in terms of our economy. But to answer your question, higher productivity. AI is not the solution necessarily, but it's part of the solution. And as Peter said earlier, we in Nebraska and Iowa and midsection, we produce far, far too much agricultural goods, manufactured goods to have a domestic market. And the onshoring, we ask about onshoring to our supply managers in manufacturing. They're not seeing it thus far. Now, that takes time, of course, but that onshoring, bringing them back, we haven't seen it yet. And I'm not sure we'll ever see, for example, baseball manufacturing in the U.S. It's in Haiti, it's in Central America, not to return to the U.S. Certain products will be manufactured here.
Great, thanks, Ernie. I know there's follow-up questions from the audience on that, but I want to circle back to Peter and get Peter's thoughts on what we've been talking about. And Peter, can you also talk a little bit about when there's a strain on manufacturing and ag in Iowa, how that has a ripple effect into other sectors?
Well, you can talk a little bit about, I mean, manufacturing is a large share of our economy. And I think a lot of it is reflective of what's happening with agricultural markets more generally, since a lot of our manufacturing is oriented toward either agriculture as an input to food production, or agriculture as a demand for our manufactured products. And so those are the ripple effects going both what's happening to the cost of inputs going into food production, what's happening to the cost to the producer directly in terms of getting at a very capital intensive agricultural production process. But I should talk a little bit more about what is the ultimate goal of trade protection. If the ultimate goal is to return us to a much larger share of employment in manufacturing, it's really hard to believe that we're going to go in that direction, and it may not be the smartest thing to do. I mean, remember that our incomes are much, much higher than they were in the 1950s when manufacturing was 25% of our employment base. And it's roughly that in China, but we're paid 6 times what average incomes are in China. Do we really want to return to an economy where all of us are going to be much poorer than we are? And I think the answer is no. I mean, even in Germany, where employment is much more highly concentrated in manufacturing, in part because of their absorption of the manufacturing in Eastern Europe when they reunified Germany, our incomes are still about 50% higher than they are in Germany. Our comparative advantage is in providing professional services, and we're very good at it. And it's not clear to me that we're going to be able to take 13% of our workers and move them into manufacturing and have the same level of quality of life or incomes that we have currently.
Thank you, Peter. Nicole, ABI last week released your third quarter survey results. So what are you hearing from members now? And what were some of the topics of conversation at the Taking Care of Business conference in June when so many of your members were together in one place? What are they talking about with these issues?
Yeah, and specific to the trade and tariffs conversation as well, and even just the economy, like we said, ag and manufacturing are intertwined. But as we look at the survey, even the results in this third quarter aren't that much different than our second quarter. They're quite a bit different from the first quarter, which was actually out in the field right after the election. So at that time, regardless of the administration, manufacturers, businesses felt that they had certainty or at least knew what was next. And so I think that's why you're seeing that. But in conversations I've had, even from the beginning of the year, the feedback from our members have been to the point about agriculture is cyclical. Our manufacturers have seen this before, and I think what some of our manufacturers, we're now seeing it kind of coming out in more of this economic surveys that are out. But our members have been feeling it for about 9 months. Things really started kind of quieting down at the end of last year. And I think that does speak to, though, how some of our members in Iowa generally, because of our state's policies that are so pro-business, some of the work that we've done, that the legislature and governor have done to help maintain employment levels, help maintain the business, whether it be income tax reductions, unemployment insurance reform, those things I think have helped sustain our manufacturers and our businesses. But as we look at the third quarter survey, and even at the conference, members were positive. They were cautious on, I didn't hear a lot of companies talking about building new headquarters or things like that right now, but you look at our third quarter survey and 57% still plan to invest. Again, that's down from 72% in the first quarter, but that was right after, that was before January hit and before we kind of knew what was ahead. And so I think overall businesses are cautious. They are holding back. You talked about the ripple effect. I think as we look at our communities, though, businesses have to make decisions, right? They're keeping their employment levels steady. There's some hiring happening, at least in our members that we're talking to. I know the numbers may, depending on who is surveyed and looking at those numbers, but our members are also maintaining their support, but they're not, their decisions they're having to make as far as what professional development conferences like the conference do they go to, what nonprofits are they able to support. So I think that's something that we see and feel as well, just in the broader economy. But the feedback at the conference was positive. That had all industries together. But again, in our survey, what's interesting, a question we tossed in this last time around is, well, what did you think that the impact would be on the one big beautiful bill passing? And most, 63%, believe that it'll have a somewhat or very positive impact on their business or industry. Again, as we're talking about certainty, now we know some of those tax implications, what that will be. But then we also asked about, and this is probably going to open up a whole nother can of worms, but we asked about the federal deficit for the first time. And so 90% expressed concern about the federal deficit and its potential economic implications. So I'm going to, leave that there and turn that back over to the economists and those others. But as we are looking at what's ahead and in the next few years, I think it's something that Iowa manufacturers especially are really good business people. They know how to run their operations. They know their cash flow. The folks that are involved in ABI, they're insulated because of smart decisions. And that's why I think we're weathering this storm, and the folks I'm talking to. But as we look at the federal government, what's next? So anyway, that's a little bit of what I'm hearing a lot from a lot of people, Gigi, but people are still cautious, but remaining that positive Iowa, put her head down and get her done.
Wow, that's really interesting about the federal deficit. We have quite a few questions in the chat, so I'm going to kind of skip ahead to a couple of my last questions and ask each of you, what is your outlook for manufacturing in Iowa? What are the bright spots, like you mentioned, Nicole? And really, I'd love to hear from each of you about what needs to happen for things to improve. Let's start again with Nicole.
Great. Well, I think I've talked a little bit already about some of the bright spots, but one thing, as I said, as I'm traveling around, that I really appreciate too, what's happening right now at the state level, the conversation on workforce training and skilling and upskilling. What our manufacturers need now, it's not a one size fits all approach. Matt and his team may have a type of weld that they do. They may have specific training that they do on their automation. So we really, and what our members are talking to me about is they need people that are qualified, that can get through their initial application process, and that are ready to go to work. And so I think really as we're looking ahead, the opportunity for Iowa, and something that we're leaning into as an association, but also our foundation and our workforce programs, is how do we make sure that the skills and training programs we have in the state for our employers and employees match with the need that we have. And so, talking to our members every day, it's hard not to be excited and proud and be just honored to represent them and to be an Iowan. But there's always room for growth and opportunity. And I think really the workforce training is the next step where we can go and that we can see some big changes that will help all of us in rural, because I know that was a question, in rural and in urban Iowa.
That's great. That's really interesting. Matt, what would you say?
One more time, that question.
Sure. What's the outlook for manufacturing in Iowa? What are there any bright spots? And And really, we'd love to hear from a manufacturer what things need to happen for things to improve.
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, manufacturing is a bright spot. We continue to invest in automated manufacturing equipment as well. Those are not necessarily job displacing type investments. We might be able to then shift labor to a different area. We'll also be able to, we don't invest in anything like that unless we're willing to grow, which also is our our M&A policy as well. We've purchased several businesses over the last 5 years in order to add to that overall manufacturing prowess. We've increased employment by more than 100 people since that point. So, and since 2020, since the pandemic, we've put another 50% on our top line revenue. So it's an important thing that we need to keep doing. We need to keep responsibly vertically integrating. We very much believe in being in more control of what our overall process looks like. While we can't completely insulate ourselves from things like the tariffs and supply chain issues, we try to handle and have a plan or a pipeline or other levers that we can pull to be able to offset those disruptions. But no, I mean, it's Ernie mentioned a minute ago, is AI part of that solution? Absolutely. Is labor part of that? Absolutely. There's a question about labor shortages and immigration in the chat. We're proud to say that we have approximately 15 to 20% of our workforce is a Hispanic workforce, and I did 80 employee interviews completely in reviews in Spanish this last year, and it has. I mean, it's an important thing to be able to continue to do that, but there aren't a lot of policy things that help us do that. For smaller businesses, absolutely, but businesses of our size, there's no incentive to do that. It's just you're going to go after that labor market or you're not.
Great, thank you so much. Peter and Ernie, I really want you to answer this outlook question as well. And I'm going to throw in there, do you think that pricing, that businesses are changing their pricing structures to incorporate future inflation at all? Are you seeing any of that? Let's start with Peter.
Well, the pricing, I think, I mean, you did see almost an immediate increase in the cost of automobiles when those tariffs were announced, not because the cost of producing the car went up, but the cost of some of the competitors went up immediately, and so you do see that. And whether it happens immediately or down the road. Yesterday, Caterpillar announced that their poor second quarter results were in part due to a 15% increase in their costs of production that were directly related to tariffs. So I think you're beginning to see those effects showing up in wholesale prices. So what's the cost of actually producing something? And then obviously to the extent that they can, they transfer those to the customer, but of course at a higher price, the number of units that you're going to sell is going to go down. And so exports are down about 5% since April. The trade deficit is smaller because we're also importing less. But that just means that the overall volume of business that's being done, and in particular in manufacturing, is beginning to get smaller. And so I think as businesses are getting squeezed on the input side, you're going to see some of that get transferred to the customer, but some of it is just going to be that the businesses are going to get smaller and they're going to make less money.
And thoughts on outlook and what needs to improve?
Well, what needs to improve is if you add Canada and Mexico together, that's about half of our Iowa exports right there. And so if we can just maintain our trade relationships with our two biggest customers, that wouldn't be a bad thing. And I think right now it's critical. I think we did permanently lose markets in China with the last round of tariff increases, certainly in pork and soybeans. I think we gave a lot of that market to Brazil in the case of soybeans. And it's hard to reestablish those things, and we're certainly not going to reestablish them by increasing our costs to our customers. If you look at who seem to be kind of wanting to tick off through trade policy, it's our biggest customers. I mean, that's just bad business. And so I think we really have to rethink this. If the whole idea behind the tariffs was to make deals, then for God's sakes, let's make some deals very quickly, because Iowa atypically is harmed by anti-trade policies. We are a state, we're not that heavily engaged, but the sectors that we have in manufacturing, particularly in agriculture, they have been hurt by the last round of anti-trade policies. They were continued under the Biden administration, and now we're doing another round of those things. And I don't think that bodes well for business in Iowa.
Ernie, your thoughts?
I agree with much of what Peter said there, and I think I expect manufacturing to move sideways to a bit down, but that's in the next 6 months. Beyond that, I'm very positive about the Iowa economy, the U.S. economy, the regional economy, and why is that? Well, I think AI is going to, and you talked about pricing. AI is very, very useful in terms of what we economists would call segmenting the market. The airlines are doing it now, being able to offer different prices to different groups, what we would call, again, price discrimination. And that's very helpful to the manufacturers, will be more helpful. And if you're talking about Iowa, look, I mean, Iowa does an outstanding job from the universities and the community colleges and linking that to the manufacturers and to the producers. I mean, that is a really strong part. And we don't get enough, the community colleges do not get enough credit as they should in terms of being linked to those businesses. And what we're seeing now, of course, is we're going to see more and more of that in terms of AI. And in terms of AI, one thing that's going to be press the economy is data centers. I mean, data centers, that's where the AI uses a heck of a lot of electricity. Now, Iowa's been pretty well blessed in that regard in terms of electricity, but there will be some real issues if we don't have, for example, battery storage. We need battery storage, particularly in those places where you've got a lot of renewable. And I expect that to be an issue going forward. But nonetheless, I've got to think that Iowa long-term has got very good state. I think one other thing, I didn't grow up in this part of the country, Iowa or Nebraska, but it's a very welcoming environment. Go to Fort Dodge and see the Korean companies and the other companies there. They're well accepted. That's not always the case across America. So I think this part of the country that we live in and work in has a lot to offer. And I'm very positive long-term about the outlook for manufacturing and agriculture and livestock as well.
Great. Thank you so much. We're just about out of time. I want to give our panelists an opportunity to give a final takeaway, but while they have a minute to think, I'm going to turn it over to Chris for a few updates from BPC.
There we go. Having a little bit of a computer issue. Thank you. We just want to say thank you again for being here today. Again, our panelists are going to give us a final closing thought here today. But if you enjoyed today's event, we've got some other events that are going to be coming up as well. On August 14th, our Project 515 #2 on the office market is going to be underway. That's a virtual event. We'd encourage you to join us for that. 90 Ideas in 90 Minutes is on October 2nd. Tables are currently available for that. If you're interested, reach out our way. GA ticketing will go on later this month. And we'll have a Jobs Outlook virtual event on October 15th and our Fearless Main event on October 23rd. You can learn more at businessrecord.com/events. Manufacturing manufacturing is an important topic for us here at the Business Record. We're going to be talking about manufacturing, of course, throughout all of our products. And to mark the occasion of talking about manufacturing on our September 26th issue of the Business Records, going to be a manufacturing takeover edition. It's going to feature stories and content specific to the industry. It's going to provide manufacturers the opportunity to showcase the amazing things that they're building right here in Iowa. We'd encourage you to reach out to our team if you're interested as a manufacturer and having your company profiled in some fashion as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists here for a final takeaway. Give us a closing thought, something that you think our audience can take home with them today. And we'll go with, let's see, random. We'll go with Peter. Start us off.
Well, thanks. I think I've been really depressing. So maybe I should have had another cup of coffee before the.
You're an economist.
Well,
That's
there-
actually
your
how we pick
job.
our panelists. Yeah, we pick an economist to make sure to bring us down just a little bit. keep us
That's right.
grounded.
But let me just to throw one more sort of one of the positives in the U.S. employment or in the Iowa employment growth is transportation and warehousing, and we are at the crossroads, and that's one of the reasons why north-south trade is important to Iowa. And I noticed that there was one question on the how does this affect small towns versus large towns, and Ernie's in Nebraska, and Iowa's more rural than Nebraska, which you may not think about at first because but it turns out most of western Nebraska is empty. And the reason is that they don't have in close proximity a job center in western Nebraska, and so off-farm or small town to urban commuting is not an option. You have to actually exit in order to attract those jobs. And one of the reasons why Iowa's been able to maintain its small towns is that disproportionately the people who live in small towns do not work in the small town. They work in a nearby job center. And you can start thinking of places like Carroll, Iowa, that employs a large number of people in a 6-county radius of Carroll, Iowa. I do think that in the case of Iowa, one of the things we have to do is to get away from some of our rural versus urban discussion and realize that we're all interdependent on one another. And if we're going to have job growth, it's going to be disproportionately in those job centers because they have the infrastructure to support that. And that's what supports then the ability for those small towns to survive. So I don't know if that addresses that particular question, but we are not in this as an island. We are in this in a very interdependent market. And to the point of being at the crossroads, if there's a large amount of north-south and east-west traffic of goods and services, Iowa benefits from that because we do a lot of that transshipment based here in the center of the U.S.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for giving us a little ray of sunshine there. We appreciate it. Let's go with Matt next.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, no, Peter, I'm glad that you ended strong there, but it has been a relatively depressing mood here, definitely from the international side of our business. I had a question come in privately that it was actually going to be my last thought. I think this is really just going to depend on how long this situation exists. I think that if we roll this out in 3 months and everything changes, I think that's probably about the length of time that people can tolerate this before some significant dominoes start moving. I know that we talk about it on a daily, definitely weekly basis here on what we're going to do with a supply chain issue here, a vendor issue here, a growing international problem here in this market. So there's a fair amount of angst that we're trying to be able to navigate right now, but that long-term uncertainty is something that businesses are not going to tolerate, and definitely their boards are not going to tolerate. So the larger the business is, the faster this will probably move, would be my guess.
Thanks for that, Ernie Goss. Ernie?
I'm going to
Okay.
end on a positive note, of course. Looking at deregulation, what the Trump administration is doing is very, very important, particularly for Iowa in terms of deregulation, removing barriers to doing business in the U.S. I think that's very positive. Likewise, if the president's able to negotiate tariffs down across the globe, that's going to be a great thing. Now, the opposite would not be so great. So again, and then finally, I'd like to see AI. Now we're learning and like taking baby steps, but that's going to be an area where the U.S. is going to do an outstanding job, and Iowa and the midsection of the country will likewise do well there. So I'm very positive. And again, I would argue we live in the best part of the best nation on the face of the earth. So it's good to be here.
All right, Nicole, wrap us up.
Yeah, thanks. I on the policy side of things kind of talked about the wrap up on the workforce training, but just building off what Ernie said, one, thank you again for inviting us all to be here. Thanks for the conversation. I learned a lot today. You know, I have maybe been rosy, but I know that our economy and our manufacturing industry is not without challenges. I hear those every day as well. But what I think is so great and what we get to represent and what I'd encourage you all, we do the coolest thing made in Iowa. Almost 100,000 people voted on amazing products. We make so many things here by individuals that have been part of this community and part of this state. So that's one. We want to continue to double down on that. So we're doing an RV tour in October, going around the state, celebrating manufacturing, celebrating the partnerships they have with their community colleges, with their high school. And so I just say, you know, as we look at these challenges, also look at the bright side and look at how much these manufacturers mean to our communities and mean to our state. And so with that, I would, you know, just say thanks again. And, you know, I think we have a great story to tell. Our manufacturers do. And it's great to be able to share that with everyone every day.
Thanks, Nicole. And I'll just share that, you know, when we host these type of events, our goal is to talk about some of the challenges. We like to do it because we think it's important for us as an organization to help foster those conversations so that we can find solutions to it. So I appreciate each of you today being open and forthright about some of the challenges you all are facing, because that's what gives everybody the opportunity to best navigate. When they've got good information at their fingertips, they can do their best to navigate through that uncertainty. So thank you for giving us your time and wisdom today. We too are a manufacturer of sorts. We work each and every week to manufacture the business record, and that takes a lot of people and a lot of time and energy to go into it. And as a locally owned business, we're working hard to navigate through some of the same challenges that our manufacturing friends are as well. So if you're not already a member, we'd encourage you to become a member of the Business Record to help support us and help support coverage and events like this. Of course, if you're interested in advertising, we would be open to talking to you about sponsorship opportunities as well to help support our organization and our work as we continue to move forward. I want to give a big thank you to our supporting sponsors, MVS and IEDA, to both Sarah and Gigi for moderating. This was Gigi's first crack at moderating a Business Record event, and she did a fantastic job. So thank you, Gigi, for that. And of course, again, a thank you to our panelists who did their best to take all that uncertainty, help us unpack it a little bit, and learn a little bit as we all begin to navigate the next few months and weeks ahead. Finally, a thank you to joining us today. You've got many places you can be. We know that. So you spending your time with us learning, we really appreciate that. Again, I'm Chris Koneski, president at BPC. Thank you for being with us today, and don't hesitate to reach out if I or anybody on our team could be of help. Thanks, and have a great afternoon.